All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Pump House's series of artist talks. My name is Olivia, and I'm the gallery coordinator here at the Pump House. And today I am joined by Joan Geary, a current exhibiting artist. So thank you for joining me, Joan.
Well, thank you for having me, Olivia. I'm really excited for the opportunity at the Pump House and really looking forward to the opening night, too.
Yeah, so Joan's exhibition, The World in a Grain of Sand, will be on display in our front gallery from May 22nd through July 13th of 2024. So, Joan, why don't you start with giving us a little bit of your artistic background and inspirations for this show?
Okay. Well, I've always been interested in art, even as a small child, preferring at that time coloring books and paper and crayons to anything else. And due to the way my family operated, I spent a lot of time alone as a child, which really prepared me for being an artist because, as you know, artists spend about 90% of their time in isolation in their studios, and we need that. There's a famous quote by Nikola Tesla that says, "Be alone, that is the secret of invention. Be alone, that is where ideas are born." And I think he was so right. Then in my teenage years, my mom enrolled me in summer school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And that happened in the mornings, but the museum was free to students at that time. So I'd spend afternoons in the museum going through all the galleries. And I mean, I love art. I love every genre of art history. So I began looking at the Baroque painters, Rembrandt and Caravaggio, and I loved the way they achieved their light and their paintings with chiaroscuro, the bright lights contrasted with really dark darks. And then I started looking at the Impressionists and seeing that they achieved a sense of light with just strokes of bright colors next to each other, blue, purple, green, yellow. And that was exciting to me. Then I started studying the Surrealists, and at that time it was the mid to late 60s. The focus, the movements that were gaining traction at that time were pop art and op art. And I loved that too. It was exciting to me. And even though I continued to paint and draw realistically for a very long time, I now realize that it was in those years that mentally I started reducing painting to color and shape, even though it didn't really show up in my work until much later. And then later in my 40s, I was balancing working with finally going to college and enrolling in college classes, studying art history, drawing, painting, and even I was making welded steel sculpture at that time. And but it was when I found a workshop in cold wax that the whole trajectory of my art career changed. So I had been lucky enough to go to Santa Fe, and I think it was 2008. And I saw a cold wax artist named Rebecca Kroll, who was doing just amazing work that I just loved. And so they ran a video about her in the gallery that she was represented in. And I discovered that she lived and worked in Osseo, Wisconsin, which is only about an hour north of La Crosse. And I also realized that she was an instructor. So I thought, wow, I could do this. So I signed up for one of her workshops, and that's where everything changed. Then I studied with several other kinds of artists and workshops with various painters. But then I began doing work that I felt was good enough to enter into jury competitions. So I went down that whole route. And then the goal there was to gain an audience. So but then in 2015, I was invited to submit my work for inclusion in Rebecca's book, and I'll hold it up here, called Cold Wax Medium: Techniques, Concepts, and Conversations. And this, for anyone who's interested in pursuing cold wax, is like, we call it the book in the cold wax community. It's a comprehensive guide to working in this medium that you really need to have. The book is available at they run an online school called Cold Wax Community, and you can get the book through their website, coldwaxacademy.com.
All right. And could you describe for people who might not know what cold wax is and how you use it in combination with painting?
Sure, yes. And I have a can of it right here. I'll show you. It's a medium. Cold wax sounds mysterious, but it's really just a painting medium. It doesn't require any heat like in caustic. You don't have to fuse it. It's a sort of a paste-like material that looks like, it's like the consistency of Crisco. And you add it to your paint, maybe 20 to 50%, depending on how much you want to pump up the paint. And what it does is it increases your capability in these ways. It allows for excavation back through the layers of painting. You can cut back through it with solvents to reveal the history of the layers that you've put down. You can carve into it with tools like these, pottery tools. And there's very little, I think people, when they think of painters, they think of people sitting at a table, relaxing and painting with brushes, but this is very physical work. I don't at least use brushes very often. You apply the paint with tools like the squeegee here. Here's another one. So you just, scoop up the paint off your palette, apply it to your surface like this. Sometimes I'll use tools such as these that painters use. There's a variety of sizes of brayers that you can use. You roll the paint on with these. You can use a paint roller like a painter would use. And then it's a very expansive medium in that way. It allows you to build up texture. You can have a glassy, smooth surface or a textured surface.
So it sounds like you work in quite a few layers with your
Yes,
paint and wax. Okay.
yes. I begin with no idea in mind. Usually I start a panel. By the way, we paint on these wood panels. And here's one I'll show you that's a finished painting. What it is like a layer of masonite attached to what we call a cradle, which is a beautiful wood base. And you don't have to frame these paintings if you don't want to, because the wood cradle makes a beautiful presentation. The back looks like this. And the reason we paint on wood like this mainly is because the tools that you require to build the surface and excavate through it are it involves a lot of pressure and a lot of texture. So you don't want to be cutting into canvas. In other words, you want to have a really firm surface. So I begin by laying down usually marks with a oil stick like these. This is the R&F oil stick. They come in hundreds of colors. And then I'll cover over that, usually with a bright color like cadmium chartreuse or neon yellow or pink or orange. And that way, the base is a light color. For me, in my work, I like to have light come through the layers. So that sets up the possibility for the light to come through.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for giving us such a in-depth view into your process and what you use and how you use different tools.
Uh-huh.
Why don't we get into some of the pieces in your show, and you
Okay,
can discuss a little bit of your inspiration behind this specific series.
sure. This painting is what I consider the crown jewel of this exhibition. Compositionally, it works well. The colors are ingratiating to one another. I've achieved a sense of light. There's enough contrast to maintain interest. The figure is fantastical enough to be considered mysterious. But the most interesting thing about this painting is I did it, and then I was sitting reading poetry, which I do often in my studio. Poetry seems to help me link to the spirituality in these paintings that really come to me from I don't know where. like I said, there's no planning with these. They just start appearing. And so I was reading this poem, and I can't remember the poet or what the poem was, but there was this line in the poem, King of the World to Come. And I looked up at it. I looked up at the painting and I thought, wow, it reminded me of Jesus as the Lamb of God, which points to my Christian faith. And oh boy, here we go again. Sorry, I'm
That's
stumbling
all
a
right.
little. Jesus as the Lamb of God, who, for believers, Jesus is certainly King of the world to come.
All
That way,
right.
in that way, this painting seemed to come from an otherworldly source.
All right. Wonderful. And does that tend to inspire most of the paintings in your show?
Yes, I think it does. Like I said, I don't know. Eventually, when I'm working on paintings, I'm laying down layers of color. I'm starting to make marks. I'm starting to organize the marks. And there's a lot of sitting and staring that happens um, for a long time. Here we are as artists. We sit and literally watch paint dry, right? And that's when the thinking and the the what to do next comes. But like I said, this particular painting has a lot of spirituality in it for me, at least.
All right. Wonderful. Well, let's move into another piece in your show, Ascend to Summer.
Yes, this painting, this is one of my favorite paintings too. Um, I started this painting just by laying down yellows and oranges, and you can see in that sort of pointed shape in the center of the painting, the yellows and oranges there were covering the entire panel initially. And I thought, well, okay, all right, I gotta start setting up some contrast here. So I took a piece of butcher paper and I tore it out at random and laid it over the center of that panel where that pointed shape is. That was the shape of the paper that I tore out. And then I started laying in darker reds and oranges over that. And I had a big hot mess on my hands, so I didn't know what was going to happen. But when I took the paper off, wow, that shape appeared. And so then I realized, well, I've got to start laying in some other colors to crank up the heat of those oranges. So colors are like chameleons. They change depending on what you put next to them or over them. And what I've learned over the years is you can lay down oranges and reds, and yes, they're warm colors usually, but you can really crank up the heat by laying cooler colors over them or next to them. So I put in those cool grays and blues all over the top section, and some along the bottom too. And that's when the warmth really started to exude from this painting.
Wonderful. Yes. And in person, this painting is very vibrant. It's beautiful. It really does warm the space like you're
Thank you.
describing.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. This is another piece in your show, Whale Watching.
Yes, this painting came to me following a vacation that my husband and I took to Cabo San Lucas, which is on the Baja Peninsula in Mexico. And it's a place in the world it has everything I love: water, desert, mountains. And so the landscape there really inspired me. And the hotel we were staying at was right on the water, but adjacent to the hotel were these big rocks, almost like mountains. And so we would climb over the rocks and look at the water from that vantage point. And there we saw whales frolicking in the water, and it was really beautiful. Such a relaxing vacation. And then when I got home, these whale shapes just started emerging in all of my work. So this one, I like the palette in this one. I like even though there's a lot of organizational composition to this painting, it still maintains a sort of playful spontaneity that I like we were seeing with the whales. And so I named it Whale Watching.
Wonderful. Yeah. And in person, these paintings have great texture, and there are quite a few that are very atmospheric, which are quite beautiful, and you really get a sense of space
Thank
within
you.
these images.
It's funny because the cold wax allows you to build texture, but it's funny because you can have a really rough to the touch cold wax painting, but very often if you touch these textured looking paintings, they're quite smooth to the touch, so they invite touch.
All right. Wonderful. Well, is there anything you would like viewers to keep in mind when viewing your exhibition in person?
Yes. Well, I guess I'd like people to bear in mind that abstract painting emphasizes emotion over representation. And it, it, it can be construed as a visual language of its own, conveying emotional or intellectual responses to the world. And that, my hope for the work is that it inspires a reaction from the viewer. Now, abstract work very often can invoke anger from people, even. I've seen it in museums so many times. People standing in front of an abstract work saying, "Oh, my 5-year-old could do that," Um, and I like to hear that. One time I had an opening and a woman said right to me, "Well, when I look at your work, I feel like I could do that." So I wonder, does that mean I've done my job? I've made it look easy? Or does that mean I haven't done my job? I've made it look too easy.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, all of you are invited to join us at our free artist reception on May 31st from 5 to 7 p.m. Joan will be here and you can come and meet her in person and view the rest of her work. And so thank you everyone watching for joining us, and thank you, Joan, for speaking about your exhibition.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you again for the opportunity.